meeting for the Village of Austin. Environmental Advisory Council meeting for the Village of Ossining for February 4th, 2025. Chairperson Kate Schlott present. Nick?
Councilperson Nick Tedrick present.
And Katie?
Katie Alberti, council member present, or EAC member present.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, Environmental Advisory Council member.
That's fine.
And I am Danielle from Nelson Pofor. He's a consultant to this council.
Corporation Counsel Stuart Kahan. Good evening.
Great. And we have trustee Dana White has stepped away for a moment. She is present.
She's there. She's just
there. I see her. All right. Great.
she's just
And,
outside of the range of the blurring.
I see the top of her head. All right. And we have trustee Patrick Yost present with us tonight. I believe you're here. We're discussing the updates to the village tree ordinance.
Yep.
Tonight, and you had some questions and concerns about the updated version of the ordinance that you wanted to discuss.
Yeah, so appreciate the time. I guess sorry to be dragging y'all through this. So but you know, so as I was going through it, I just, you know, I read all this stuff. I read it pretty closely. I as much to Council Kahan's chagrin, I often read it a little too closely, and
Well, no, it is appreciated. It is appreciated.
So yeah. So I guess, you know, we can talk through and maybe maybe to help me a little bit, because I tried to dial in December because I thought y'all were talking about it, but I don't think you had a meeting and stuff like that. So maybe you can help me a little bit with just kind of going back to the genesis of the changes and sort of the objectives of what you were trying to get done with the changes, and then and start there, and then I can kind of comment. I've got my comments, right, and I've got comments and questions, and just kind of like, you know, some combination of structural and a bunch of stuff, right? But we can go through that. So
yeah,
would that be all right?
That'd be fine. Absolutely. So originally this started about, I want to say at this point about 2.5 years ago. We realized that we had some gaps in our tree ordinance policy at the time. There were, you know, a number of issues of clear cutting that had come up, and there was really no penalty that we had established for when someone was in violation of our tree ordinance. The EAC was asked to look up what neighboring municipalities have done and what other municipalities around New York State have done with their tree permits, their tree removal permits. And we compiled a lot of that information and went through it to see how stringent places were, but also like what their requirements were in establishment of, you know, when you do remove trees, how we should deal with that. So a lot of what we did was fill in a lot of the loopholes and keeping it more in line with what neighboring municipalities have been doing, what works for them, what didn't work for them, and establishing a tree bank, which we didn't have before. And we still currently don't have at this point, but establishing a tree bank so that if we did come across situations where a person couldn't replant, due to some of the limited size of the properties, that they would have other options available to them to at least preserve some of the tree canopy and coverage that we've had throughout the village. So a lot of what we've done was also to try to make the process a little easier, with clarification as far as like what would require, what wouldn't require a permit, and really filling in some of those gaps that we didn't have things written out for before.
Got it. No, that's helpful, right? And I totally get a lot of that, right? Like I understand the clear cutting and the penalties, like, you know, like we should never have what happened up on North Island happen again, right? It's like just pretty simple, right? So you know, so I totally get that part of it, right? And I get the part around like you're bringing this in line with the wetlands regulation, right? So that was part of the definition of that. So I understand that, you know, I understand bringing that into, you know, that kind of links these two up, right? Because now this
Yeah.
matches that, and you know, from that perspective. So, from that perspective, right? So,
Mhm.
I'm kind of, so it's you know, it's good to understand that, you know, you looked at a bunch of other neighborhoods and other municipalities and stuff. But I guess, you know, one of the big things for me, right, is so I'm a homeowner. I've got a lot. I've got a relatively big lot, and so when I look at proposed legislation, and this is the way I've done it, you know, the last couple of years, whenever I read stuff, right, it's just kind of like, you know, can a homeowner understand it, right? Can they understand simply what they need to do? If it's a simple request, can they get it done in one trip or two because they have to close it out, right? And you know, is it kind of, you know, relatively easy to follow? Obviously, for complicated items and things like that, it makes, you know, there's a whole different process, right? So like, you know, carving out stuff that needs to have site plan approval and everything going to, you know, that sort of a perspective, like, you know, that makes sense to me, right? Because that's more complicated and it's got a lot more. There's, you know, the likelihood of a lot more kind of stuff going on and a lot more being disturbed and things like that, right? So I get that, right? Like, that makes sense and stuff. But as I was reading through it, right, there were a bunch of, like, I mean, I don't know what the best way to kind of go about it, right? Like, I can just kind of like dive in and start asking questions, right? And so, so in general, like, I found that as someone from the general public, who who isn't necessarily steeped in rules and verbiage around, you know, trees and plants and all that kind of stuff, and I found it tough to follow. All right, just bluntly. So like, and that's me, as relatively educated, able to look stuff up online, English speaker. Okay. And so, I really kind of feel like if, like, there's some of our Hispanic or people, you know, Spanish speaking folks who do end up needing to do something, like, I find that I think it'll be really tough for them to follow, from that perspective. So for me, that's kind of one of those things where it's important to me to be able to, that it's accessible to the people who are going to end up using it, or it's going to be a disincentive, right? It's going to be like, well, I don't know what the heck, sorry, I don't know what the heck I need to do. I'm going to cut it down Sunday morning, kind of thing, which is what we're trying to avoid, right?
And may I make an observation or?
Yeah, feel free. If we jump in, right? Like, I don't want this to be this is supposed to be dialogue, right? So
I don't know if this is allowed, but what if there were a fact sheet? I'm wondering if there's a difference between the amount of detail that needs to go into the actual ordinance and the amount of information that the person getting the permit has to digest, depending on in other words, can we do a fact sheet that gives directions? If you are a homeowner with X amount of trees and you're trying to do X, this is what you need to do. If you're getting site plan approval, this is what you need to do. It would have to be in alignment with what's laid out in the ordinance, but it wouldn't need to include everything. So if I'm making.
and I
This
totally agree with
was-
that.
yeah.
I totally
And
agree
this
with
was
that.
something we had discussed in the last couple of meetings, is that once the ordinance gets passed, like, how would we actually disseminate this information and get it out to people in a comprehensive way? Because a lot of the wording in the ordinance actually is the original wording that we've had. You know, most of it is what was already in the E-code. So part of what we've been discussing was like, how do we make this accessible to people so that it's something that is simple for them to do? And we had been discussing doing some sort of a public outreach and just getting this information and disseminating it to the community. So that might help, if we, as Katie is saying, maybe do some sort of a fact sheet in that way, to help get like the main points of what would trigger it, what would require you to come before the planning or the building department, you know, and things like that. Katie, did you want to follow up?
I just want, as I was thinking about it, I was thinking actually more as a tool for when someone actually goes down to the, the building department to be handed.
I haven't seen a tree permit application. So like I actually am not fully aware of like what one particularly looks like, and if you know some of this is spelled out on the application itself. I haven't had to remove a tree from my property yet. You never know, one day it will happen. But so I'm actually not fully aware of whether or not the application clarifies any of this.
My vague recollection of what we had to do when we took a couple down here several years ago, the application was confusing. So I'm thinking this might even be available for someone who's thinking about what to do with their trees and wants to know what they have to, what they're getting themselves into prior to
Yep.
actually filing an application. Like the book, I think, DMV has something like that, I think.
Okay.
And I agree with that, right? Because one of my big kind of challenges with this was, as I read through it, is, all right, if it's the tree the tree is and so the other thing is like I am going to comment on some stuff that was in there before, right?
Mhm.
But if we're doing such a major overhaul, like we should like look at stuff that was in there before too, right? Just from that standpoint. So and so the definitions would I think would definitely help, but as I would go through it is like, okay, I may if once I apply, like, is this going to be like the one time I need to apply? But then I may need to include X, and I may need to include X information, or it may need to go to the arborist, or it may need to go to I may need to have at the end, after all this stuff, I still may need to have a landscape architect create a plan for me, right, to do some stuff. And so there were a whole bunch of mays in there, which to me indicate the potential for back and forth with the building department, which is what I think we generally hear is frustrating to everybody, because it's more work for the building department and it's more work for the homeowner, and that's what drives people to like go underground, right? So
One of the issues that really comes up is that a tree removal really is a site by site basis.
Yep.
So a lot of the maze really has to really deal with the fact that we can end up being faced with so many potential scenarios on a property. And being that we have really, and this is really more of a village problem than a town problem, that we have such small properties,
Yeah.
that the potential for damage to your neighbor's property could arise out of some of these issues. So that some of it really is more about trying to be lenient to the fact that all of these different scenarios can potentially come up. And we can't really make a policy on tree removal that could be really like sweeping, because it's such a, with the environment and changes that could potentially occur, it could end up leaving a lot of loopholes again.
Yeah.
So it really is something that we do have to look at on a case by case basis. Some of it really just comes down to is that there are a lot of property owners that just don't even realize we have a tree ordinance and just go and cut the trees. And the way that they're finding out about it, it's not even that the process has been inhibitive. They just didn't even know there was a process.
Yeah.
So it becomes complicated when we start factoring all of that in. I mean, I do understand what the concerns are, but a lot of what we were trying to do was figure out ways to not be a burden on the homeowner, but also recognize that removal of nature in an an unregulated way could cause a lot of property damage over time. And while we might not think of it as being something that's significant, that can mean the difference between whether your pipes are functioning properly, or did you cause a slump on your, especially in a hilly area, did you cause your land to slump down and pull utility poles with it? So it can become complicated when we start thinking about what other properties are adjoined to.
Yep. No, and I understand that. I get that, right? It's like, Kate,
Yeah.
you've seen me around at a bunch of these things.
Yeah, and I know, and I completely.
But I'm trying to
understand
take
where
it from a
you're coming
perspective of,
as a
and I need
homeowner's
to,
perspective. Yeah.
from a homeowner's perspective, right?
Yeah.
Because then the other thing I do is I go and I sit back and I said, okay, so how would this apply to me?
Yeah.
Right? And so, like, basically I would need to get a clear cutting permit every year in order to do my trimming. Right?
Not for
Because
trimming.
like,
No,
well, no,
not-
because I'm like trimming, I've got all these grapevines all along my fence, right? And like every year I trim all the way back, right? And there are more than 5 of them, right? Or if I trim
They're not-
them twice in a year.
But that
that's-
wouldn't be clear cutting. Clear
It
cutting
is,
would
because it's
specifically,
because it's
no,
more
no, no,
than
no,
5,
no, no, no.
because-
Clear cutting would refer to cutting down trees that are 10 inches diameter at breast height or more. If you're cutting your vines back, that's considered regular maintenance. But clear cutting is specifically referring to a
removal.
minimum tree size removal
Yep.
of 10 inches diameter at breast height.
Okay, if it's limited to
Yeah.
removal, then that's fine, right?
Yeah,
Right,
that's
right.
that's really where it comes up. Yeah.
But then, so the other thing is, like, I do want to do some landscaping, and if I
Mhm.
want to replace the shrubs in the front of my house, which are overgrown, right? That there will be more than 5 of them, and so that would be clear cutting, right? And
Are the
'cause
Can I-
they're all woody.
shrubs, but are the
They're all
shrubs
woody.
10 inches diameter at breast height?
Well, I'm looking at the definition of
No,
tree.
but the
that might
bark,
help
I'm talking
clarify.
about the trunk. This is specifically referring to the trunk. The diameter at breast height is referring to the trunk of the tree. So
Right.
if your diameter is less than 10 inches at breast height, you don't require
Yeah, it's 6. It's
a
6.
permit. Yeah.
It's 6.
But even if you step back a second, there's a difference
Mm-hmm.
between shrubs and vines and trees, and the
Yeah.
ordinance actually defines a tree as any woody plant having at least one well-defined trunk with a diameter at breast height of 4 inches and having a clearly defined crown, which a shrub doesn't. And by definition, it's not a tree. So cutting back your shrubs and your vines, nobody wants to
Have
know
at
about that.
it.
Yeah, but I would argue, like, the definition of a tree is any woody plant. And so plants include vine, like, and this is where
Well, that's why that's why in the way that we're defining it, we would specifically look at what our ordinance is saying. And for some people, we could probably go back and forth in what would be in a, appropriate definition of a tree, but for the purposes of what the village is doing, we would just stick to what our definition of a tree is.
Yeah. And I think there's
And-
actually
and-
botanical definitions.
sorry.
Yeah, and then
But
that
Because-
might be some of the technicalities in
I
there
am,
too.
right? Because the
Yeah.
tree definition is any woody plant having at least one well-defined trunk and with at least a DBH of 4 inches.
And a clearly defined crown. I have
Mm.
tons of forsythia that shall never be a tree because it just goes all over the place.
Got it. And so that's part of that's part of the, like, where I think clarity piece where people might get in trouble, right?
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
And
understand.
so, yeah, and so
Yeah.
I'm just trying to understand, like, if I type in, tell me what a woody plant is, and it gives me this whole
Mhm.
list of stuff, right? And so it's kind of, so I'm not trying to be overly difficult, but I'm just trying to think about it in terms of somebody who doesn't know all this stuff.
Well, as
Yeah.
long as the woody plant, however someone might want to define it or understand it to be, as long as it doesn't hit that 10-inch diameter breast height, then it wouldn't really trigger requiring a permit.
Yeah.
It's when we let it sit there longer and it gets older and wider that it becomes a problem. Often, I have this back and forth with my husband all the time with trees on our property too. So it's like trying to understand as the homeowner what you really want to get involved in and what, financially would make sense and landscape wise would make sense. So it's like trying to balance all of that out. But as long as you're under 10 inches, you really, have
Okay.
fun.
My name is
Yeah.
Lucy.
Maybe
Yeah,
not put it that
okay,
way
but-
in my case, but yeah.
Okay, but
In
it's
evolutionary
six,
biology
it's
here at
six.
Harvard.
It's six.
I
It's
study
six
trees
days.
and forests, and I've always been fascinated by trees.
Yep. So this is part of the like clarification, right? So
Yeah.
Yeah,
but because and so maybe there needs like in this piece, like maybe there needs to be a picture.
Yeah, like what's a clearly defined
me.
crown to your point within that definition of a tree, like a layman might not quite understand that, and there's that balance or fine line of people who are more, in tune with maybe the linguistics of
Right. Like so like like the simple test is okay, if I go type into Google, what is the crown of a plant? It says it's the area where the stem joins the root. Right? And so that's not like the canopy. That's
Right.
That's
right.
so
But the crown of a tree is different. It is the
And I
canopy.
think that's what Trustee Yost is getting at, is that like we really should define what that means.
I
That
like his idea of a picture.
or the
Yeah,
guidance
that-
is easily accessible of how you.
Yeah,
exactly.
we should make it very clear, like when we're saying what a crown refers to. And we do have a crown here as far as like all portions of a tree, that's excluding the trunk and the roots. So that's kind of like the opposite of what, if we're talking about the crown of a plant versus the crown of a tree. And, so we should probably be very clear as what he's saying
Right.
in that definition. Yeah.
Because like I said, the definition that's in the draft, right,
Mhm.
is a tree is a woody plant. Right.
Having at least, yes, but more, it goes on beyond that.
Yeah. Having at least one well-defined trunk and a DBH of 4 inches, right? And it clearly defined.
Fine.
So if I go look up crown, it just says it's the area where the round. And so so my bushes have,
Yeah, and
people have something like that, which is 4 inches, which means,
Right.
like if I'm gonna
we don't
replace-
want to confuse a shrub plant with a tree.
right.
And some people actually might not know the difference. They buy a house, they have wooded plants on their property, and they might not know the difference between what technically is a shrub and what technically is a tree, especially when they both can be the same size at one point. So I understand what
So that's where
that
I'm going.
clarification,
Like,
yeah.
so that for me is part of the definitional thing, which would be helpful. And sorry to be a pain on this, right? Because I'm not an arborist. I'm not so I'm just a homeowner who I'm putting myself in the, okay, if I want to go get that, and so that's kind of the question. So that just take that, and I would ask you just think about that a little bit, right? Think about it from, read some of the stuff from the point of view of somebody who doesn't have the deep understanding of horticulture that y'all do, right? Which is why you're on the AC, and which is really appreciated. Right.
Yeah.
And then I actually pulled up the tree. Oh, that's a town. Never mind. Wrong one. It's the town, not the village. So anyway, so that's like some of the definitional pieces. There was another question around the difference between the tree warden and an arborist, and is the tree warden an arborist, or is like our arborist obviously has some accreditation or some, I would assume has some accreditation or something, but is there a difference between the tree warden and the arborist?
I don't know if I'm
Excuse
looking at
me.
the right version. Oh,
From
go ahead.
my-
Yes, Danielle.
From my understanding, the wording of tree warden allows for somebody to step into the position where our current arborist is that is not certified to be an arborist. That would be relevant in a situation where we were not, like the village is not able to acquire a certified arborist. However, we do have one, and we don't anticipate her going anywhere anytime soon, but it's just something to keep in mind for the future if it's difficult to find a certified arborist, then that's where a tree warden would step in. And that could be, any kind of horticulturist or, plant specialist, etc. So that's just something to consider, but we can switch it to either or,
I think one of the issues is that when I look at the ordinance, we don't have a definition for arborist in there. So I
Right.
think maybe part of solving this issue would be define what an arborist is and what makes it different from a tree warden. And then we can, in that definition of tree warden, make sure it's clarified that in place of an arborist. I mean, I would assume that we want to go with an arborist whenever possible. But yeah, this would allow for a backup just in case we can't do that. But we
But I
should definitely
see
make
the-
that clear.
I see the terms being used in different instances, in different situations. The tree warden is acting on behalf of the village and the village's interest. There is also a situation here that's oh, okay, the homeowner can hire their own arborist to make some determination or file like a notice of emergency removal. So an arborist is sort of like hiring a contractor.
Yeah,
Um,
I had a tree fall down and I hired Westchester Tree Life. Right.
And but maybe we do define an arborist because I think they have some sort of certification, I think,
yes.
versus the tree guys who just have a chainsaw.
Correct.
I'm very
And
into that.
yeah, we can certainly define, either or if that's the direction we want to go in, or we can change it all to arborist.
Well,
It's-
I understand what you're trying to do in terms of giving yourself flexibility if you can't
Yeah.
have it first,
Yeah.
right? And the language in there is all intended to be recommended, right? Because the final authority has to sit with the building inspector, right, by law. Because we're not deputizing people, right? So I understand all that, right?
Mhm.
And which I get, but just, but the tree warden, who could or could not be an arborist, right, is kind of really what I hear you saying.
It's sort of the equivalent of a building official, for instance, I think. And they're acting on behalf of the village and they've been hired, they're being contracted to make decisions for the village.
Some of the
Whereas-
function, oh, I'm sorry, Katie. I thought I was on
That's
mute.
how,
talking to myself.
yeah, yeah, and that whereas in some instances, the homeowner has to come in with expertise and they are told to get their own arborist expertise. So if we're going to be changing tree warden to arborist, we need to be careful about whose arborist it is.
So I was just asking about the difference, right? And, and I totally understand what you're trying to do with maintaining the flexibility in the future. And I think that's probably a good thing. Because, if in the future we run up against something like we are now with building inspectors, right? Like qualified zoning inspector, it's really hard to get them. I was up in Albany the last 2 days and I mean, people were talking about that all the time and there were, multiple sessions on how do you share resources across municipalities to get stuff done, right? And so that was actually a big theme of a lot of the conversations, which was pretty good. But so that would just be my question, just to kind of clarify, and then if we're okay with a homeowner's arborist making the recommendation, and then that means that it doesn't need to go to another party, right? If you're okay with that, then I think you should say that, right? But
I don't know if the ordinance says that they would have to get
has to be some sort of
a second one.
I'm looking at.
The village, I was gonna say that, I mean, to the point of all this, it does imply in some of these rules that there is and will always be a village arborist, and Danielle was getting at this too.
Yeah.
So you're kind of are caught in a spot if the tree warden is not also an arborist. And we do not happen to have a arborist under contract with the village.
Right, like if your current arborist like gets sick, right, or something like that, and then it just kind of ties you up a little bit there, right? And then also, I mean, the way like number 19 says that the arborist will determine if the removal of the tree stump is necessary, and
Right.
that's always kind of a thing.
The village arborist.
Every
yeah.
application is going to
Yeah.
go to, it
Where
requires
is that? Where is that?
248.19.
Okay, 248.19.
which one
So
I
then
actually
should we change it? I guess, so I guess my question then would be if we are willing to accept an outside arborist, and again, we're assuming through the definition of an arborist, this is someone who will be licensed, so that if there is an issue, we have something to fall back on. Rather than saying the village arborist, just say the arborist.
I would be, well, because we're using that term in a couple of different places for a couple of different purposes.
different ways. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
That's
and
why
one,
it was confusing, right? Because
I think, but I think, Patrick, what you put your finger on is, in this instance, the village arborist is essentially the village tree warden.
yes.
And you don't necessarily want a contracted party for a homeowner making a decision that we want the village official to be making regarding a removal of a stump or something, because they can't,
Maybe that should actually be the village tree warden.
perhaps. But
But I'd even take it a step further and be like, why isn't that the homeowner's choice?
because sometimes the removal of a stump can cause land issues. So it really, it does depend on the species and the size of the tree. So we were trying to leave that wording so that it really was, again, a case by case basis. Like, we can't be in a case like this, we can't really make a sweeping decision on letting a homeowner decide to have a stump removed. Some of those roots could be embedded in pipes and cables that are underground. So it really, we have to really understand what removing that stump what could potentially impact.
So you implying that now you're going to require a 611 call to map out underground cables before work gets done?
No, but that if you're removing a tree, part of the tree permit process would be understanding like how much of the stump you can remove, and sometimes you can't really figure that out until you have the tree down. It all depends on the health of the tree and the kind of tree it is. And it's not so much about having a 311 call on the utilities, it's also, again, removing a stump could cause slippage.
So I guess the question is, who makes the decision? If we use the word village arborist and there isn't necessarily a village arborist, is the tree warden the appropriate terminology here?
Well, I think it's also, we want to make sure we have somebody who really is qualified to make that kind of a decision.
Mhm.
And that if we are at a point where we don't have an arborist and we are going to deputize somebody as a tree warden to make a decision on behalf of the village, then that person really had better know their stuff.
Right. Yeah, in this instance, that's part of the question, right? Now
Yeah.
Yeah.
you kind of bring up a separate issue question for me, which is the general end result of this rewriting is essentially to take pretty much any homeowner prerogative out of the picture, right? And because the homeowner has no say anymore. It's the village arborist who's making the decision around yes or no. The tree warden or the arborist is now telling you whether or not you can or can't take the stump out. And then the criteria, and bluntly, the criteria for making the decision are really lopsided away from the homeowner.
Well, it's only if it's a tree with a burst height of 10 inches or greater.
Well, no, because if you go
Sure.
to section D around determination by approving authority, right? Which is, and so these are the criteria that the determining authority, which would be the building inspector for 1, 2 trees, right? the EAC and the planning board for clear cutting or site plan stuff, right? I mean, if you just look at the decision criteria, the homeowner has to prove hardship now in order to have anything on their side in order to remove a tree.
Could
Right.
you, which, where are we again?
So I'm on section, sorry, I'm jumping around a bit, right? 248.14 permit procedures.
Some
Section-
relevant is 248-7, but let's go to that.
Sorry, I'm looking at 248.14. So this was a version that we went through at the work session the other week. Here, I can pull it, I can share, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
Let me see if I've got it.
Because
well,
actually, I
I've
don't
got
know
it
if
up.
I don't know if do we have the most updated version since our last meeting?
It should be on the agenda.
Oh, okay.
Which section of 20?
Yeah, I'll pull it up for you, right? No, this is 11.1, right?
Oh, I see. Section C.
If not, I have the most updated and I can pull it up.
Yeah, that would be great.
So it's like I'll pull up the one that was linked in, right? Because
Yeah.
it didn't really change. So
What I'm thinking about though is you do have the permit procedures which spells things out very specifically, but also even prior to that, there's the issue of whether it's subject to permit. So if it's as a DBH of 10 inches or less than 10 inches, it's not, nobody cares.
so so maybe this is one of the problems, right? Because the version that I thought we went through at the at the meeting, it had a definition. Clear cutting was 5 or more trees with a 6-inch DBH, and a tree was defined as a woody plant with a DBH of 4 inches.
I'm looking, I don't know if I have the most recent one, but I'm looking at, what was I looking at? I just lost it. Here. Regulated activities, tree permit required, which I believe is paragraph 248-7. I think subparagraph B is relevant. The removal, killing, or otherwise destroying or committing any act which will lead
Yes,
to the
that's-
destruction of a tree with a DBH of 10 inches or greater on any private property.
No, I see. I understand what he's saying. There's the discrepancy between clear cutting and what we're defining as a tree. And this was some of the issue that we had gone back and forth between 6 and 10 inches. So I think one of the versions that we had 6-inch diameter breast height,
Okay.
and we were supposed to make that all consistent. So
And-
that actually might be the one thing we missed.
Okay.
But I don't know if that was
10 inches makes
no,
a
but
big
that is
10
no, it
10
does make a
inches
big
versus
difference, and
4
we
makes a big difference.
it
Right.
does. And if
Huge.
we're telling people that 10 inches is the minimum requirement, then we should make sure that that is consistent across
Mhm.
the board. And I think that was one of the issues we had flagged on one of the later paragraphs, but I think we missed it in the definition. Because I know we had changed it to the most recent version to be 10 inches.
Okay.
Or at least what
So
the
that-
tree
that's
permit
a little bit,
requirement.
right? Because that means it'll be required less, right?
Hey,
And so-
Kate, I'm sorry. There was a reason I believe that you
That-
made it for clear cutting to differentiate from a single tree. Clear cutting, you're dealing with 5 or more trees. So it wasn't just the
Right.
10 dBH with that. Now, I
Oh.
wasn't on all your discussions, but I believe you distinguished the type of trees because in clear cutting, you've got a group of trees you're
Okay.
talking about, while otherwise you're talking about a single tree.
Okay, and then maybe that is what we should probably clarify in the definition.
Yes,
Because look
and,
at I forgot what I even said. So there you go.
the revisions you're thinking of, Kate, are in 248-7,
That's
regulated activities. That's where we made it all consistent.
right,
Okay.
right. And that's exactly what I was thinking. So maybe that, as to Stuart's point, we should make that very clear in the definition of clear cutting to explain why that is different than the 10-inch DBH for a single tree.
It's helpful for me, like, so, you know, and I get, right, because like,
Mhm.
you know, the fact, and I understand the time-based proponent of that, because you don't want somebody going, well, I cut 3 this month and 3 next month and 3 next month and 3 next month, and then 6 months later they've got, you know, the whole yard's done, right? And so I get that part of it.
Yeah.
You know, for me, like, and maybe this is never going to come up, right? But like every now and like
You never know.
the letter of the law, like, you know, could end up with 3 and then the storm and you have 2 more and then you're retroactively
Right.
getting a
Right.
clear cut.
Well, in a situation where it's something that's kicked off by a storm or a disease that comes in, I mean, that has a different process.
Yeah.
Because that's an emergency case. Yeah, but I understand, you know, what you're saying with that, and a lot of it could be resolved with just making sure that these definitions are as clear as possible.
Right. And then, so one question for you then would be, in some of the, well, we'll get to the criteria, right? But since we're on 24/7, 24/8 right now, one of my questions was, and this is where, like, the tree warden versus an arborist versus an outside versus an inside, like 24/8D. Which is my version.
Which one is it
Dying
again?
tree, the dying tree.
Yeah, the
provision.
dying insect infested or otherwise hazardous is certified in writing by the tree warden. So that assumes that's the village tree warden.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You know, if it's certified by an external arborist, and you know, Stuart, this is where, you know, from a liability perspective, I don't know if there's any difference or not. If it's,
We wanted this to be the village's arborist to be the one to go to the house to make the determination if the tree should be taken down. We thought that that was better than relying upon someone else's person to come in. It's, well, because very simply, it's, you know, we have the same situation in building situations. You know, they could have a structural engineer who says X, but if ours says Y, we're gonna go with what Y says. So here we have an arborist under contract who would come and review the tree and make a determination if the tree should come down. Ultimate determination rests with the building inspector, but the call is made by the village's consultant.
Well, this doesn't need a permit though, right? So it's just, you know.
No, it would not, but still you need someone to confirm that that's the
Right.
condition of
and
the tree.
and what's going to kick off that process? Like, you have to put a formal written request in to the building department, which, you know, because every request has to be online. So it's got to be a tree permit. It's the only way to actually get that executed.
Or is there some other kind of analogous process in another code or something that is similar to this, where you're getting basically, you're putting in a not as formal or arduous request in for the arborist to come out and affirm, you know, the condition of your tree, basically.
Like, operationally, I wouldn't want to put the building department in a position where email requests they have to keep track of, right? Because that's the whole point of their online system and everything running through that system.
This is the permit, I mean, yeah, I guess is there an easier streamlined thing through the permit portal or whatever that could allow for some simpler. function like
Maybe
this.
that's a question for Joe or whoever manages that portal piece, right? But, and then I would assume that there'd be an incremental fee because the arborist has to come out, so they're going to need to pay for that fee. An incremental fee on top of the, you know, so there's going to be a fee associated.
No, there wouldn't be a fee for that.
No, there wouldn't.
We have a fee for we pay the arborist The only time there would be a fee is if we're dealing with a tree permit. And generally that will be with a site plan where they would have to pay for that as a consultant's fee. But for this, there would not be a fee.
So this would be a better cost option for the homeowner than not
Well,
having
the
to get their
village
own-
is paying for this.
Well, I mean, the homeowner doesn't have to get their own arborist, I guess, and the other option.
Nope.
Chelsea was-
So then maybe that wording, as far as like the homeowner bringing in their own arborist maybe isn't even necessary, because if we're ultimately saying that it's going to come down to whatever the village's arborist or tree warden determines, then why bring in an outside person? Or why would we encourage a homeowner bringing an outside person if we don't have to?
Like for me, that's a weekend storm. Right? So like
Right.
B1 says that, notice of emergency removal shall include the certification by a certified arborist, right? And so that says that you can do it from an outside person. Like, if there's a storm Friday night and I've got, something that's cracked and it looks like it's going to fall on my house, I'm going to have someone there that weekend. I don't care, right? And then
actually, yeah,
I'll file the notice on Monday or Tuesday or whatever, right? But that seems to be a little bit, that's the emergency situation. So,
Yeah.
right.
I think also some of this comes down to just even educating people to know that there even is a process.
yeah.
And I think once we finally like get all this figured out, like that's part, like that's half our battle,
Yeah.
is even just getting this information out to people to know that there are avenues to take, and that there are different processes out there for different situations. And I think you're right in that maybe we can streamline emergency situations in a different way so that it doesn't require feeling like you have to go through the permit process, but at least understanding that it could be simpler than that
Yeah.
whole going through the whole thing.
The emergency things feels pretty simple, actually. You
Yeah.
just got to like let people know, basically.
And that's why I keep thinking of this brochure, like, what do I do if my tree falls down? What do I do if I want to take out 5 trees?
So quick kind of divergence here. Is insect infested include like tree of heavens that are covered with spotted lanternflies?
Oh, yeah, if we can get those out, yeah.
All right, cool.
Well, I think we had some issues around the or not so much the definition, but the process for invasive trees that were a particular height and size. Versus, whether we wanted to say it was just okay to go and remove them versus requiring a permit. And ultimately we decided that if it was, again, a certain size, because of the fact that it would be so established in the soil, that we would still want to go about the permitting application just to make sure it's removed properly. But as
Yeah.
far as an invasive species, like there shouldn't really be an issue with getting, as far as I understand, getting a permit to remove an invasive species, because we want those out.
Oh, yeah.
I think the only thing that we might really want a homeowner to do in that situation is really just see if they can either pay into the tree bank to have it replaced, or replant in replace of the tree of heaven that was there.
Native, something
Yeah,
native.
something native, so that we don't have just more of them sprouting up, because I've noticed that as well. The tree of heaven, especially in the last couple of years, has
True.
been coming up everywhere. I
It's-
pulled out at least 6 over the past summer from my garden beds.
Is that the one with the orange roots?
It's got a long brownish orange root. It gets down really far, and it's actually really, really thick.
Yeah.
Once it gets really established in there. And it can get really hard to pull the older it gets.
Yeah. Nope. Totally get it. So, okay.
Yeah.
All right. But so if we go back to the 248.14, section C. And so, and let me just kind of share it. I'll share it, 'cause what I'm at, right? Sorry. Oops, where'd it go? Where'd it go? Where'd it go? Where'd it go? Gotta get the right thing. Sorry, I've got all kinds of stuff. Is it this one? Yeah. Can you see that?
Yes.
Yep.
Awesome, thanks. So the one thing that I was a little just I'd ask you to consider, right? Is this section C, which is the decision criteria that the approving authority, in which case it's either the building inspector under potentially the recommendation of a tree warden or an arborist, or the planning board, right?
Mhm.
The factors to be considered, okay? So the only, what I'm going to call on the side of the owner, the property owner, is if the presence causes hardship, right? Or, like endangers the property, of the adjoining owner, because you've chosen to take out the interference with permitted use, right? Which to me is real, right? If someone's got enough room and they want to, build a deck and there's a tree in the way, but they can get a permit as long as they put in another tree, right? Or something like that should be okay, personally, from my perspective. But then there 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of these have been 6 other criteria were added. And just like a literal reading of the criteria, like I can see, and I said in this is taking it a little bit to the extreme, but I can see never approving a tree permit because of the negative effect on the health or general welfare of a neighboring community. Because by definition, if you take out a tree, you're removing carbon dioxide scrubbing, and so nope, sorry. So when I think about the balance question, for me, that feels a little unbalanced. And, in there are cases where, some unbalance is fine, right? Where we're trying to be safe and we're trying to be careful and around wetlands and we don't want stuff going down steep slopes, and I get all that sort of stuff, right? But just in the general sense, it's kind of tough. And then I also think that some of these might put the building inspector in a tough spot, right? Like, can the building inspector really opine on like vegetation and the historical context of the surrounding community? Right. I think that's
Well,
really tough. for
Some
building
of these
inspectors.
areas,
So yeah, that's kind of like the
Yeah.
question on some of this, right? And so as I read through it and as I think about how it's actually going to get implemented,
Yeah.
If the only thing that a homeowner can do is prove hardship, and I've heard some of those conversations around, variances for hardship, right? And it starts to get into the whole test of, is it self-determined? Is it your own fault? Is it like all that kind of stuff? It just, it feels tough. So I'll stop there.
Well, I know that like some of the village does have a historic district that is designated. So
Mhm.
at least as far as, at least in those districts, whether, and if we have a significant tree list, which we don't actually have at this point, that would take some of the burden off of, the building inspector to have to make that kind of decision. But I hope that someone's not gonna come to us and start making the argument on carbon scrubbing from the atmosphere and trees to keep,
But that's
a permit
that's
from,
what it says.
but that is kind of like going to the extreme. I don't know
Well,
if,
Well,
But that's what's written in the proposed law.
I don't know, I
the
think that's really what
way
I'm getting at, yeah.
the way I see it personally is that we phrase this in a way where it definitely is up to individual interpretation, but I think it's much like seeker if you're familiar with seeker, these things are only relevant if there's a significant adverse impact. There may be an adverse impact for sure. Any tree you're taking down, has a impact on, very minor, but impact on how much carbon is taken out of the atmosphere, the surrounding ecosystem, etc. But taking down one tree might not have a significant adverse impact, and that's when you would really flag something like this. Maybe we should make that more clear,
And
but
ultimately, would be up to the arborist anyway. In the end, to make that determination, as far as I understand.
No, they can't, right? It has to, it's the decision
authority.
is the building inspector on the recommendation.
Sorry, yeah, right.
And I would say, at least to the carbon argument, that's why there is remediation built into the permitting process, right? So I don't know, you could make the argument back that, well, we're replacing the tree or we're playing into the tree bank and therefore offsetting the carbon sequestration that we're losing from this tree, maybe. But
Yeah, so just like I'd ask you to just think through some of the wording here, right? Because like the literal translation of like the literal synonym for deleterious is negative. It's not like severely impactful or anything like that. It's just negative,
Yeah, negative.
right? Which is just a little bit less than neutral by definition. So, so it's just something to consider, right? And I'd ask you to reconsider and was there a reason for taking out number 2?
%100% sure.
well, I
Off the
mean,
top of my head, I can't.
it would be, a tree removal would often be involved in the permitting process of a permitted use of the property already, right? So that's kind of baked into the whole approval of it, maybe anyway, right? If I understand this correctly, like if you were,
No.
you don't think so?
Not necessarily. Like I'm thinking
Not
like
necessarily, but
not necessarily, right? And so
you need to put I mean, you were saying putting in a deck, I think, right, as an example. What would and I'm not an expert on this as a relatively new person to advising on these councils and municipal processes, but what that would go through a permitting process through the appropriate channels to do this all right, and the tree removal would be part of that. If it was going to be needed to be taken out.
right, but that's the tree removal is a separate approval.
Right.
Then is it designed appropriately, and do you meet the zoning setbacks and all that sort of stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a separate decision criteria. And by removing that number 2, that's not an acceptable criteria. Right. It means that, because you can replant one over in the corner, but it's not because it interferes with the permitted deck that meets all the zoning requirements, or that you've got the variances for, that's irrelevant to whether or not you can take out the tree. And so there might have been a reason. I just that's why I wanted to ask if there was a reason for removing that, and consider, like, just think, if you could just think through that a little bit, that would be, I think that would be good. So
yeah, I mean, thinking of like solar panels on a house, maybe too. Does this come into conflict in the same way you're describing right now?
I would actually think, well, yeah,
because you'd want to do that in instances if it was if it was shading your roof a lot or whatever, so you could get a.
Yeah, I would think that if it's shading the roof a lot, that would be just part of normal pruning. Like I've got these, God, I have no idea how big they are. 150 foot pine trees, like 20 feet from my house. and they're, I have somebody come in and they trim the stuff that's overhanging the house, right? And they, they're arborists, and they come in, they do a good job. They've got them anchored together, and like, it's all safe safe as it can be having a tree that big, that close to the house, but.
And that's a situation, though, I think that would be covered under one if you so chose to take it down and it did have a trunk diameter of more than 10 inches.
Oh,
I
no,
think
this
that
is-
instance would be covered under one.
Yeah,
'Cause I
yeah,
can see it
if you
going.
wanted to put, if you wanted to put some, like if you had like a really narrow pine tree that, like, but no, these things are massive, these are probably. They're probably 5 feet, 4 feet diameter. So.
But I think it's important that the positive effects of trees and how integrated they are into neighborhood systems is also is raised up as being an important part of the decision-making process.
And I'm totally good with that, right? And
Yeah, I don't know if we're,
understand that, right? I'm
Yeah.
not saying, I'm not saying take
Right.
3 feet out. I'm just saying that, you know, there is a bit of a balance, right? And it felt like it was, to me, personally, felt like it balanced a little far by taking out that permitted.
is it possible that I'm thinking the term cause hardship actually covers an awful lot of territory. If I wanted to build a deck and this tree was like right in the middle where it had to go, I could take it. I could use that as the example of hardship.
Is that,
I'm not the approving authority, so I don't know.
yeah, I don't know. That, like,
Logically, that kind of works for me.
yeah.
We can
Something to-
certainly take a step back and go back over these regulations too, and make them a bit more clear as to what exactly we're looking for here.
Yeah.
For sure. Because I do agree that it has to be more clear that these are all possible significant impacts and not just general impacts.
Yeah, because that's the way it's written. It's written as kind of general now.
Yeah.
And and so it felt, that's why to me, like just with the literal reading of it, like if like a judge would read literally what's the word on the page, right? And that's where it was coming like that for me. So
Sure.
No, and that's appreciated, because if anything, this is the time to hash that out.
well,
Not
exactly.
not
That's why I
after
was-
when,
wanted
yeah.
to come on tonight, and I said I would, and so and I appreciate you taking the time with me, right? So my wife's not happy, but
No, I mean, I appreciate you taking the time to go through it in such detail as well. So this is helpful to capture a lot of that language, that like, if it really can help clarify a lot of the process, make things as clear as possible, and put it in terms so that it is more accessible. That this is helpful.
yeah.
Yeah.
Trying to think if I had other kind of comments or stuff. Oh, I think I asked. I think Stuart dropped off, right?
Yeah, he had to go. He's just sent me a message.
Okay, but I did have a question around the significant tree. Primarily because if a homeowner agrees to be significant, a homeowner has to agree to it. But then what sort of either notice or requirement does that place on either the village or the homeowner to inform the next homeowner upon the sale of the property or the transfer of the property to a different individual, right? And so because that new individual would not have agreed to that being significant necessarily. So I just don't know enough about the law. I'm not a lawyer, I'm not an attorney. And I just don't know enough about the law to understand if that creates some sort of a duty on the village to notify people when it's transferred that the tree is substantial and that they can't do anything with it, or significant and they can't do anything with it or something like that. I just don't know. And that would be something where that's a question for, if there's guidance from any other municipalities around that, or if there's any case law or anything like that. I just don't know. So,
Yeah, that would definitely be a Stuart question. I believe it's something that can be included in like a deed, like an easement is, but yeah, we would have to confirm for sure.
right. And that would make it a like fairly significant process to be recorded in a deed,
Right.
right? And like, I don't know if that's what the case is with,
And-
like up
And
around us, there are
ultimately,
trees
it
that have
is up,
placards on them
yeah,
that are
yeah.
like, so like, I don't know if that makes those trees significant or not, or like, they've got this thing that says, you can't touch this because of something.
And I think ultimately the way that we had it worded or the way we wanted it was that it would be up to the property owner. So I don't know if we actually discussed a process if a person wanted to remove a significant tree from the list. I don't know if we ever actually discussed that. Not that we want to encourage that. But I think you're raising a point of like if a new property owner comes in and, yes, it might be in the deed, but after a while, if they change their mind, do they have an option for backing out?
Right.
Yeah.
Just something to
Because
look
it's
at.
not the same thing as a conservation easement.
No, it's not.
Conservation easement is something that's very different.
That is very
Than
much more permanent.
yeah,
exactly,
than
right? And
than that.
so
Yeah.
this is kind of like a conservation space around the tree that you can't touch
Yeah,
that.
in a way, yeah. Like
But
you're agreeing to conserve it, but there's nothing holding it by law to say it has to be in
Right.
perpetuity. Yeah.
Right.
Or
And I would just
99 years or whatever it is.
yeah, I just wouldn't want to get the village into some sort of a spat down the road when, somebody buys the property and it's like, what do you mean I can't do that? Like,
I think part of
Yeah.
it's also because it's something that we don't officially have yet, but it's something that we have been talking about for a couple of years because it was in the original ordinance. So it was, we had this ordinance that was saying we should have a significant tree list, but we didn't have one, but we had all these trees that we were like, oh, but these mean so much to the community. And we never really thought about like the opposite direction of like how that could play out if we needed to remove one for whatever reason. Like what
Yeah.
does happen if a tree gets damaged and it is a significant tree and it unfortunately does have to come down.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, like all those beautiful trees on Underhill, right? Like somebody runs into one, like, like one of those might have to come down, right? It would suck, right? Because that's
Yeah.
gorgeous stretch, like along the
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with just, making sure it's very clear how we want all of this to operate once it's finally implemented and what the long-term impacts could potentially be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe the answer is like, you keep the significant tree language in there, but on the back end, you've like worked through the process, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
To help make it clear. And, the process is something that is documented and that Stewart's good with, or there are no like issues or something like that, right? And so,
Mhm.
For sure.
like I'm curious, just I'm not arguing with. I just like was question about which like trees were you thinking might be considered significant? I'm just kind of curious so that I know in my head kind of like what you're talking about.
All the trees on your property. No.
Specifically yours, Patrick. Well, there was the tree over on
I
Brandreth.
lost those two
where-
storm.
Which one?
Yeah, like the 150-year-old.
Yeah, so there's the tree that's by Brandreth, that has the plaque in front of it, where Brandreth Aqueduct and Broadway intersect.
Yep. Okay. Yep.
Yeah.
There's that one. There was that big oak tree, I think on Watson. And there was another one that I can't remember off the top of my head, but there were some that were around the village that I know that we had identified as potential, but not ones in particular.
Yeah.
Um,
No, it's
outside
just,
of the two off the top of my head that I can think of right now.
yeah, like I'm not saying it's got to come out or anything, right? Because I understand that the potential value to it. It just like one of the think down the road questions.
Yeah. Well, we
Yeah.
want to make sure we're not wording it in a way where it's a one way street for it, and that's it. So I think we should be careful to
Maybe,
clarify.
or maybe you do want to make it one way just because of
Or at least define what the process is.
yeah, define the process, right? That's all.
Mhm.
Yeah. So no, there are a bunch of trees up in this neighborhood that are so. I lost the two big gorgeous trees in my yard to storms, so.
The storm where we had all those ones down, like at the Washini Park, falling into the street.
Yeah, well, the first one was actually like 8 years ago, right? No, actually it was like not 10 when we first moved in. It was like
You
just,
guys, I have to sign off now.
all right. Thanks,
Thank
Dana.
you.
Thank you, Dana.
I'll
Thank
see you
Pat.
tomorrow, Dana.
Pat, your attention to detail is greater than mine, obviously, but I guess the question is, where does it go from here, right?
Yeah.
So, do people feel confident that changes can be made, or how are we feeling about
And
that?
I'm happy to go back and forth with y'all on stuff, if you have questions, and I'm happy to,
I mean, it sounds like a lot of the comments were definitely in terms of clarifying definitions, making sure that we had things that weren't defined before that are in there, making sure that we're very clear on what the difference between clear cutting and why we established 6 inches for clear cutting versus the 10 inches for single trees, and just making sure the wording is as clear as possible. I think
yeah, because remember, like we could be always look at it from a constituent's perspective in terms of, can they understand what they have to do? Can somebody who's not who doesn't have an hour and a half to go through and have a conversation like this, and who doesn't understand tree trees and all that much, can they understand or can they be helped to understand what they have to do? And is there a way to potentially get it done in as few visits or trips to the building department as possible?
And I think
It's better for everybody.
I would recommend that we look at putting together, or the village look at, well, whoever does it, putting together information sheets that extract
Guys, later.
clearly explain
Thanks. Cheers.
explain what the homeowner has to do, because
Yeah.
there's really no reason the homeowner needs to wade through the whole verbiage of the.
No, they shouldn't.
ordinance.
They shouldn't
Yeah,
have.
and once we have the wording down and we know exactly how we want to do it, we can pull that language out and really find like the great bullet points from it and
Exactly.
highlight the really important
You
parts.
can put a little, you can put like, little pictures like, the shrub. No, the shrub doesn't matter. Like this,
Right.
this vine doesn't matter. Like, the clematis is technically a woody plant, but no, you're not talking about that, right? It's like,
Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh, now I have to know whether we have ordinances that have diagrams and pictures in them. This would be a first.
I'm
I
not
don't-
talking
no,
about an ordinance.
no,
I'm
not
talking-
in the ordinance,
Just
not in the
the-
law.
Oh, you mean in the thing? Okay, in the
handbook.
In the
pamphlet.
guidance.
Yes,
in the
okay.
guidance- in the gu- on the
Okay,
guidance.
yes, that makes more sense now. I was gonna say, that's getting really.
No,
Laws
Although
should have
ordinances
pictures.
can.
Okay, that's good to know. But no, yeah, that's a great idea. Like, give a diagram, give an example, show like what would be, what wouldn't be,
No,
and make it
Right.
yeah, nice and pretty visuals that always will draw people in and just really help define it as easy as possible.
Or even a flow chart. How many trees are you cutting? One.
No, don't do that. I tried to do that. I spent an hour trying to do it and I
Okay.
couldn't do it. And
Thank
so
you.
that's actually why I wanted to start having conversations about this, because I tried to do that and
Oh.
like I couldn't. Right. And so
Right. I think
I
in terms of next steps, we'll definitely go back to the drawing board a little bit. In terms of EAC discussion, we're really, I know we've been working on this for a while, but there really is no
sorry.
rush. No. It's totally fine. This is good.
This is what we're here for.
Yeah.
This is our responsibility.
We really
Feedback's
are
really good.
in absolute no rush to get this done, so it's good that we're taking this time and hashing these things out, because there is no deadline for any of this. Would it be nice? Yes, of course, but there really is no deadline. So I think in terms of next steps, you know, I've been sitting here taking extensive notes on Trustee Yos's questions, on our responses, and some of the stewards' suggestions. So I think maybe, I don't know, Kate and Trustee Yos, if we want to sit down with Stuart maybe and go through some of these. So then that way we can come prepared for our next meeting to go through each question and provide suggestions to each one and how, like, what that's going to look like in the ordinance.
And I would argue that, you know, I think everybody on the phone on the call here today was like engaged and like had some good ideas, right? So
Mhm.
I honestly I wouldn't limit it to just Kate and myself, right? I think.
No, I'm just saying, like, just to get clear initial questions.
I mean,
that
anybody who wants to join is more than
Yeah,
welcome
yeah.
to join.
But you know, I know we
Yeah.
had some specific questions for Stuart and, you know,
Mhm.
just some things that beyond our knowledge
Yeah.
that he might know. That way next meeting we can go through, we can have more defined questions and topics, I guess. And I don't know how I'm trying to explain this, but that way we have a list of things that we can go through and discuss with suggestions already, so that we're not sitting here spinning our wheels. And not that that's what we're doing right now, but
Yeah.
um, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Can I go ask one more question not related to the tree stuff real quick?
Yeah.
Well, it's ancillary, but
If it's open space, I don't want to talk about it.
no, not that. So how do people who live in the village know if they're in a wetlands buffer or have wetlands from their
So
property?
you are going to make me talk about an open space inventory. Okay, that's how they would know. We would actually have to have something on file to show them directly. And that was part of what was, I watched the whole video from last week, so I know this was discussed, but that was part of the reason why doing an open space inventory and a natural resource inventory was one of the reasons we wanted to do it was so that information would be available on the website for the general public to actually be able to access and know that. Right now, unless they know how to go on to, the New York State GIS Westchester County website to look that up, they might not know off the top of their heads.
Well, yeah,
Um,
well, that's where I was going, right? Because there is
Yeah.
the whole wetland clause in the tree law,
Mhm.
which
And the
does
wetland
make-
law is relatively new.
Yep.
Um,
I mean, I was part of that. That was part of the group that
yeah,
drew that up, and that's I think probably where we first met, or either that or on the plan.
And New York State wetland law just changed as of January 1st, and that it's going to make everything extremely complicated. So every single map that's out there currently with New York State wetlands on it is informational and not official. And in order to really know what wetlands you have on your property, you have to get a jurisdictional and like advisory.
oh, fun. Okay,
Yeah.
so I guess this is a conversation that will
Oh.
have to be
That's a longer
continued in more
conversation than
detail.
It got
Um,
much more complicated as of January 1st,
Okay,
unfortunately.
which in the
we don't need to
future,
dive
as we
into
come
that
as,
tonight. Sorry,
I'm
folks.
happy to discuss in the future, and I'm sure we'll have to make updates to our wetlands ordinance as a result of
Put the genie
this.
back in the box.
So, but to be continued on that one, yes.
Well, yeah, because I was just thinking about, like, can we do, now we can't, but could we do like a village map with like this is where the wetlands and this is where the buffer is, right? So people could just kind of look at it and go, oh, that's me.
Well, I will, I'm going to go back over the videos, again, as Mayor Levin had pointed out, I do work at PACE. I am in the environmental studies and science department. So
Okay.
that's something that I can talk to some colleagues about and see like what directions we could possibly go with doing something like that. Because I also know that from what was said that necessarily putting maps together like that wasn't necessarily a high priority. So how can we actually accomplish that task to make that available and still be able to, move forward with those things, even if it's not the
I mean,
highest
yes,
priority on
it's
the
a
list.
question, but kind of for me, it begs the question of if there are more and more things in the zoning code which are behave differently if you're in a wetlands or in a buffer zone than if you're not. We should make it easy for people to know if they're in a buffer zone or not. Is
Agreed.
where I was headed, right?
Yeah, and I think doing an
Impact.
inventory like that would be
Exactly.
really helpful to help clarify that for homeowners.
Yeah, that's kind of where I was going, right? I was just trying to try and make it easier because
Yeah.
the only way I can figure it out is GIS, and I only know GIS because Jaime taught me when we were doing the comp plan. So,
Okay. Well,
And
you know what,
now-
we'll have to sit down and discuss, and I would be happy to talk more about that and explain some of that process in more detail and clarify why we were talking about it and what future steps we could take to actually get that done.
yeah.
So,
And
yeah.
so yeah, and don't get me wrong, I'm not looking to argue the buffer or anything like that,
Oh,
right?
no, I'm not taking it that way at
This
all.
is
I
purely-
understand.
Helping constituents understand what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. And that, I think that above all, if anything else is really what our goal should be, helping them understand
Yeah.
what their responsibilities are.
Totally.
Right.
Awesome.
All right.
for
Thank you
keeping us
for
on.
coming. All of the feedback, we will discuss and we'll be in touch and we'll figure out a date where we can finalize, hash things out and have stuff ready for our next meeting.
Yeah, awesome.
And if
All
not, we'll
right,
just discuss at the next meeting anyway, so.
Okay.
Nice to meet
Great.
y'all.
Thank
you.
I
Me
know
too.
I met
Great
some- I met
feedback.
some.
Have a good night,
Very much for
everyone.
Good night.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.